This episode is brought to you by Magic Plan, the tool that makes capturing, structuring, and sharing on-site data fast, accurate, and reliable. Used by restoration pros worldwide, Magic Plan turns your mobile device into a powerful field companion, from floor plans to full project documentation. With a focus on enhancing, not replacing, human expertise, Magic Plan is built to guide, not decide. That means your team stays independent while still delivering precise, standardized results.
Hey, want to welcome you to the latest episode of Happy Hour with Michelle and Phil. This is an opportunity for us to sit and talk with people that you might encounter at the cocktail party after a trade show is over, and just conversations that help really build relationships and also things you can leverage and build value into your business. So today we have Jeff Moore as our special guest, and we're very honored to have him here. First of all, he's just a great guy to know and a fun guy to talk to, but he is instrumental in a number of things. He's involved in his family business, ATI, from a operational standpoint, but particularly on the mergers and acquisitions level at that company. Jeff has he started out in a family business. We'll get his story in a little bit, but also very relevant in today's world. He is the current president of the Restoration Industry Association. So we're going to have a conversation with Jeff and get to know a little bit about his past and what brought him to where he is today. And then we'll talk about the current levels and current things he's doing. And that's probably going to occupy a lot of conversations about mergers and acquisitions, but also RIA. And then we'll get a look into the future. So we'll get to look through those glasses of Jeff's there and look down the road and see where we're going. So yeah, exactly. So thank you for joining us today, Jeff.
Thanks for having me.
Okay. All right. So Jeff, go ahead.
So I'm going to start. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I'll turn it over to you, Michelle. Go.
Okay. Jeff, introduce yourself a little bit with the glasses. People know you as you're always stylish, always some different pairs of frames. I'm sure hopefully a lot of people have met you at industry trade shows or seen your activity on LinkedIn or Facebook or wherever that is. Always recruiting, always talking about the big industry topics. Checking in, pulse checks, how are things going? You seem to just always know what's going on in the industry, but you've been in it for a while because ATI has been in it for longer than I think you've been around. So talk about the ATI journey a little bit, the background of the company, kind of the family legacy behind it.
Yeah, so so I'm a second generation restorer. I'm the oldest of three boys. Dad grew up in the industry. He actually worked for his story came out of BMS Cat. So Blackman Mooring is where he started off, and we moved to California. And Dad had some ups and downs in his career. Started a business with a couple of actually family members from BMS and some former employees. And then after that, he said, "You know what? I want to start a business that's repeatable, scalable, and is really built on day-to-day business." So ultimately, Dad started ATI, which originally, believe it or not, was not a restoration business. We were an abatement only business for the first 2 or 3 years. So the business in between BMS and ATI did primarily asbestos abatement work. And believe it or not, ATI's first customer was Harborough, which is now Blue Sky. They were our first $1 million customer. And we did all of their abatement work. And so I think in a matter of like 3 years, we went full service and never looked back. But yes, our biggest customer to start off with was Blue Sky, and we kind of came out of BMS Cat. So it's a really small world. But the hopes was never to create this big monstrosity that we call ATI today. Dad just wanted to provide for his family, his kids, and I don't even know if he had aspirations to build it into a $10 million business, to believe it or not. And so, yeah, and so I kind of grew up in the business. I worked nights, I worked weekends during school. And so, yeah, I really got my hands dirty. It's one thing Dad really taught us was, coming out of Texas was the good old fashioned hard work and work ethic. So me and my brothers kind of worked in our field and worked all the way up. And lo and behold, we just kind of scaled. It started off as an office, then it was two offices, then three. And I want to say California, we eventually had 5 or 6 locations doing, I think when I joined the business in full time in maybe 2001, we were still sub $20 million in business and 6 locations. So not a lot of revenue in every location, and obviously have ballooned and grown, pre M&A and post M&A. And it's been a fun journey to see, a really small company with a California diverse background into a national full-scale operator. So it's been quite the journey, to say the least.
I have one quick follow-up. I'm curious if you always wanted to be in the industry. You talked about working nights, weekends, those kind of
Hmm.
things. Did you know growing up in a family business that this is what you wanted to do, or were you one of the restoration children that are like, I am never going into restoration, and here you are anyway?
I think so. Out of the three brothers, I'd be curious what they would say today. But from what I recall, I was the only one that was set on being in the industry. I never gave it any other thought. Um, So this is what I think I was always meant to do. I think Scott at one point wanted to do something else. Ryan wanted to get into real estate at one point. Obviously, all of us ended up doing this full time, and this was really our only career that any of us had. But no, I think I was one of those people just, again, it was a small business at the time. Like, why go find a job when I can go work for dad and I can already do something I'm familiar with? Like, why make it freaking hard? I've got all my friends in college looking for jobs and I'm getting paid the same amount as my peers that are getting jobs and moving all over the country. Like it just made sense.
Yep. Yep. All right, Phil, what you got?
Well, family business. Are your kids going to follow after you, do you think?
So interesting. So it's nothing I push, Phil. So my philosophy with my kids is go follow your passion and your desires. And very few people have a burning desire to work in restoration their entire careers. I think we all just kind of fall into it. And so the kids all know they have this to fall back on, but I want them to do something they love. And honestly, if none of them work in the business, I'm totally fine. If one of them ends up working in the business, I got four kids, I'd be fine with that as well. But we're a diverse enough company now. If you want to be an accountant, you can be an accountant at ATI. But we do one thing we changed maybe pre-private equity is I think it's either 2 or 3 years out of college. You're not allowed to work in the business, period. End of discussion.
Hmm.
You got to go get a real job. You've got to have a real boss. It's not part of the family, not part of the founders. So I hope one day one of them does, but if none of them do, I could care less. I'm here to support them in their dreams, and their dreams may not be ATI like mine or, which is totally fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm going to go back and dig a little bit into this family business. So uh, you guys are, looks like your father might be mostly or partly retired, but you and your brothers are still working in it. How do you guys all stay on the same page and kind of define, like we're all going the same place together. You guys have defined roles and expectations. Each of you is doing something different in the company. And how do you, let's a multi-pronged question here. How do you define roles and responsibilities and expectations? And then how do you assure you're all going in the same direction? Because you guys have made some pretty substantial changes in the last 15 years on what you're doing.
Mhm.
I think, as you get bigger, it's a lot easier. I think as you're small and you're working with your brothers, your sisters, mom or dad, it's a lot harder, especially if you're in an office, you're in a region, you're in a state, like you're stepping on each other. Like it doesn't matter what your roles and responsibility, the smaller the company, the more hats you have to wear. And so I would say friction, like right now, I'm in M&A, Ryan's in sales, Scott's in operations, like we're not touching each other's departments. We're so far removed. That's super easy right now. But at one point, I managed both my brothers. At one point, we worked in the same offices. And I remember times where I was heading up like half the country for the company. Scott was in charge of like our cat operations. And then we overlapped because I was overseeing the state of Texas. We had a hurricane come in. I technically oversaw Scott, but he was in charge of cat. And next thing you know, we're like, yelling at each other, having arguments or disagreements because, well, whose role is it? Because it's technically both of ours. It's in Texas, so I'm responsible for it. But it was large loss and catastrophe, and we see things differently. And so I think early on in the days, the more you can have clear expectations, because you're never going to, no two people are ever going to see things the same way.
Mhm.
But the more you can be in different departments, the last thing you want to do is have a family fight in front of colleagues, in front of peers. It does happen. I do think conflict is good, but as the leader of the company, you don't want that happening too
Hmm.
frequently. But I think as a small independent operator in an office, you're going to have friction. But the more you can be in different departments and different alleys, I think it is better for you, the company, and for the relationship that you have with your family members.
Do you have any conflict resolution tips? Any like go-tos for all of you when ooh, we feel it kind of bubbling up? Is there like an automatic, all right, we know this is our like the first place we go, or here's how we resolve things, or try to?
Hopefully not in front of a bunch of others unless it's applicable, behind closed doors and off-site when possible, especially if there's big conflict. But honestly, I don't know that we've always gotten along really well. So our big conflict is hardly any conflict at all. So there has not been a lot of heated moments. But I would say the same thing's true for family as it is for our employees. If you've got a seat at the table, you've got to use your voice. And if that means I'm arguing with my brother, the CEO of the company, or if you don't have the cojones to stand up to Jeff Moore and the company, like don't take a seat at the table. You don't deserve a seat if you're not willing to speak up. It doesn't matter if it's your boss, it's the owner, it's the founder. Everyone's paid very handsomely if you've got a seat at that table and you need to be able to speak your mind. And I do think conflict is good, but you got to be respectful when there's conflict.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
So to kind of dig into that a little bit, not in conflict, you're talking about the seat at the table. And so I'm going to go into the strategic planning process. So you guys now officially have a board. You have a routine that kind of gets your leadership team together, and you have a strategy development session. There had to have been some time where your father and your brothers, you guys all sat down and said, okay, where are we going? What are we going to do? How did that evolve? When did you guys start looking at this business as a strategic opportunity and resource, and you had to start managing it as a business? And so you probably had just the family together as a board, and then it's evolved from there. But where did that process start, and how did that help build where you ended up? Or maybe it didn't. Maybe it got in the way.
So I'd say when we actually got really strategic and intentional and actually were planning, honestly, it was probably decades down the road, like probably 20 years into the business. So early 2000s to 2010. I think before that, we operated. Dad was very independent and he let people manage their office, their region, and their divisions. And so I think we had one company, one owner, as in my father, at one point with three regions that ran totally independent of each other. And what I did in my region was different than the other two regions, and that made it very challenging. So we were independently owned and operated, but sometimes managed like almost like a franchise organization. So we wore the same logo and brand, but we
Mhm.
didn't all follow the same rules. So I remember one of my peers refused to wear ATI logo gear as an example, although it was uniform and it was policy for everyone to do so. But he personally refused to do it, and so he followed his own rules and playbook. I followed my own rules and playbook, and so did the other region. And some of them did more commercial work, some hated TPA work, and it was a blessing and a curse all at the same time. And I think it was as we evolved, we became a lot more strategic and we can't run independently of one another. And I would say when we got really formalized was way before private equity, but we actually brought in an informal board of, I wouldn't call it a board. So it was a non-fiduciary board. So we actually paid people by the meeting and we would meet quarterly. And that's when the company and my family and I got really strategic and intentional about growth and purpose. We brought in these outside advisors that all came from specialty trades. So we had one person that ran a large accounting practice in Orange County. One gentleman was in the insurance world. He ran a brokerage firm. And another one was ran a really large, like 30, 40 office location landscape company. And so that really was intentional. And we tried to, and then we had someone else that had scaled companies and had sold companies. So this is all 5, 6 years pre-private equity. And they really challenged us. They didn't know the industry. And that was done intentionally, but they all had different skill sets. And one of the things I found really fascinating was the landscaper, which I thought we have nothing to do with, like landscaping and restoration. Like I can't think of two opposite things. But the reality is we're managed people, we're managing crews, and we're managing jobs residentially and commercially. And so at the basic level, we were a service company. They also did insurance work. They did landscape maintenance, like weekly reoccurring work, and they did construction capital improvement work, which is really no different than our business. And so I think bringing those outside perspective was really helpful for us. And I encourage anyone, you don't have to be a $25 million business to bring in outside advisors. It could be buddies, although I'd recommend it not be friends. You don't have to pay them a lot of money to do it. People are always willing to help others, but I think that's when we got really intentional on growing the business.
Did you have a vision of growing ATI to maybe close to where it is now or whatever when you stepped in? At what point did you see, okay, I think that we can grow and scale this? Was it from looking outside the industry? Was it from looking inside the industry? Where did that come from? Or just kind of,
Uh,
here we
It
go.
just happened. It just
Yep.
happened. Like, we hit 10 million, then it was 20 million, then it was 30 million, then 50, then 100. And we never, and we're still chasing a billion. We're still not a billion today, but I think I hired a gentleman that came out of AIG, had been in the insurance world for a long time. He's like, you guys should be proud. Like, we never wanted to say like what the next big goal was. And I think we got to like 300
Mm.
million. We're like, if we can do 300 million, we can get to a billion. Like, it's good to have big,
Yep.
giant, bodacious goals. And so we started chasing the B word. We're still chasing the B word. And I think it's good to have a big goal. But yes, I think goals are great. I think realistic goals are good. And I think big, audacious goals are really good too. And you shouldn't be ashamed of chasing a particular goal or a milestone in revenue. So, but no, we never wanted to be $100 million business. Now we're chasing the $1 billion business. And I think no matter what size you are, any good entrepreneur, you always want to be doing more. So it doesn't matter what your size is today. If we hit a billion next year, then the goal is going to be 2 billion or 3 billion. And you always have to set those goals and targets, both short term and long term. I think it's good for you, it's good for leadership, and it's good for the organization.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay.
I
Go ahead,
think
Phil.
I was just say I found it tough for companies that stop growing. They're like, okay, I'm as big as I want to be. And I actually had one company that I work with, and the owner, for a lot of reasons, did not want to grow. It's like, I'm just comfortable where I want to be, but I'm bringing big people, good people in to be a part of my team. And so he deliberately defined his next step as where my employees want to go. I'd like to support that. But then he realized within about 6 months that was a really bad that was a created a bad environment, because you got to have a director, a driver of that. And so when he got back in and said, this is where we're going, here's our destination, and you're my team that's going to get me there, we all got to do it collaboratively. It made such a big impact, because I think people want to be a part of a company going somewhere, and a company that's not growing really isn't going anywhere. And so I think that was an important lesson that he learned, but I think also one that you just alluded to. So growth for the sake of growth doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but growth for the sake of a successful organization and building successful people. If you've lost that passion, maybe that's when you bring in ATI to come in and take a look a little deeper and say, maybe we can take you to the next level.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
I have one quick
Absolutely.
follow-up to that topic that you're both
yeah.
talking about here. Because Jeff, you've made some really strategic hires at ATI, and you have press releases relatively often about these strategic hires, and you pull people from outside the industry,
Mm.
within the industry. What role has been like your intentionality with hiring and bringing in some really heavy hitters? How has that helped ATI reach its goals along the way?
Oh, I think I mean, at the end of the day, you've got to bring in talent in this industry. Although it's a giant industry, as you scale, there's not a bunch of people that I don't have a big pool of CTOs or a CFO that I can go pull from the industry. So at the end of the day, just like I alluded to with the landscape business, I think there's a lot of service-based businesses that can learn restoration. Don't get me wrong, it's tough, but I think hiring and having a well-balanced approach. Early on in my career, I never would hire anyone without restoration experience. And now from a C-suite level, like our balance should be 50-50. And I would say we have hired people from every service business, insurance, non-insurance, construction, and we've seen success probably just as much outside of restoration as inside of restoration. At the end of the day, leading people is leading people. Again, a service business is different than selling products and widgets, so that is a lot more challenging. But as long as you've managed people and responding to homes and businesses, I think that's what makes you different, and that allows you to expand. If I can only hire people from those that are in restoration, there's only so many people in any market that have managed a restoration business at a certain size and scale. There's only so many estimators. If I want to hire an estimator, I can go hire a bunch of restoration people, can hire people in construction. Quite honestly, I can go hire adjusters. Now, just like anyone else, half the restoration market out there is going to be really great and excel, and the other half may have challenges. Same thing with adjusters. Adjusters are out there estimating, and so be open to hiring people outside of direct experience. There's a lot of tangential experience that can be very helpful for you, and just know, just because you hire someone from restoration, they don't all work out. Same thing with other markets, and so be open to people from outside.
Yes, for sure.
So, Jeff, I want a question that I meant to ask earlier because I think it's foundational and I think it's really important. One of the things that you guys have done very, very well was developing your company culture built around family. And as you grow, you refer back to family a lot, but there is a deliberate, defined company culture. And so I guess my question is, was that by design, or did you kind of just roll into it and you're like, okay, this is the culture we're developing. As we get bigger, we can build on it? Or did you guys sit down and say, okay, what is our culture? What are we going to stand for? How does this company feel? How are we going to build that?
So I don't think it, just like a lot of our growth, I don't know how intentional it was. I think it just happened. And again, I think I used the three-headed monster where there was three of us running three different companies within one. There was no similar culture across regions. And we hired an outside consultant by the name of Know Your Talents. They do some RA work with us as
Yeah.
well. I remember we hired them to do some team building. And so they did a lot of personality assessment. And then we hired them. We wanted to grow the organization. We created ATI Cares. And that stemmed from them
Mm.
coming out and doing an executive team building exercise with our C-suite. And they asked my dad what our mission and vision statement was. And he's like, I don't know. I'd have to go visit our website. And we had our whole leadership team in the room. There wasn't a single person that could even list a word from our mission or vision statement. We don't even know who created it or how old it was. It was just something that lived on the website. And so it was from there that we hired them to actually create something that we could actually not only as owners know, but the whole organization can know. And we literally rolled it out through the whole company. And so I think since then, that's probably been 10 to 12 years ago, kind of when we had our outside board of advisors, is when we were really intentional. I think we had created this without knowing we had created it, but we hadn't formalized it to where
Mm.
people knew what it was.
I like it. Phil, you ready to pivot or
So
not yet?
yeah.
Go
Well,
ahead.
I know I do want to ask one question on that mission and values that you guys had that existed, but you didn't know it and you couldn't define it. Now you go into your acquisition hat, and as you look into that world of mergers and acquisitions, how relevant is a company that has and believes in their core values, their mission, and have really kind of lived that? And how many do you find, and kind of alternatively, how many do you find that are like you guys were, and they just don't even know anything about it?
Well, whether it's defined or not, I don't know that that so much matters because that certainly doesn't define a culture. I think, ultimately, is it a place that people want to be? Is it a place that people want to stay? Do customers enjoy working with you? That's really, culture is this very vague word. It means something to so many different people. But ultimately, do you take care of your employees? Do you care about your employees? Do you take care of your customers? Is it at the end of the day, all of us spend just as much time at our jobs as we do with our families. And is this family someone you actually want to hang out with, or is it a job? And so, to the extent that it
Mm.
feels like it's just a job, that's not a great culture. It's not a great environment. And to me, the test is when I talk to an owner, if I can talk to you for an hour and you're not talking about your employees, how they're going to impact if you do decide to sell your business or when you sell your business, I know I'm walking away because he doesn't care about his people. He doesn't care. He's really looking for a paycheck. And they're just bodies. And at that point, that's not going to be a good fit for us. So, again, whether it's defined or not, I don't know that that so much matters. But is that a place that people actually want to be and want to stay at?
Okay. Are you ready to jump into the RIA questions or a few more M&A questions, Michelle?
Oh, I was going to jump into M&A questions, but we can go whatever direction
Oh,
you want.
fantastic.
I
No,
think RA should be
I thought you were moving. Yeah, I was thinking you were going to jump off of that because I had a stack of questions I'm really interested in, wanted to learn more about. So, uh, I guess the first step is that I found, and this is your world now, but I found, what was it, probably somewhere in the last 10 years, equity companies started taking a real look at restoration. And the first question is, why did that happen? And is this a trend that you see that will continue? Or is it one of those people always look, yeah, it's a pendulum, everything comes and goes. So why did it happen? And is it here to stay, or is there a new iteration or something different that's going to take over?
So loaded question. So 10 years ago, I mean, obviously PE invests in all kinds of companies. So it was a relatively unknown industry. I think through COVID, I think through the real estate bubble, people have looked at it not necessarily as an attractive market in terms of returns. We're not tech, we're not into video, we're not creating things with incredible returns. Insurance companies make more money than we do. The one thing that we have is we are stable. We're in an industry that's typically safe on a year-over-year basis. We are reliant on disasters, and those are happening more frequently on a year-to-year basis. So I think if you're an outside investor, you're investing in restoration as the stable asset you're investing in. If you look at COVID, like if you were in education, you got killed. If you're in hospitality, you got crushed. So many industries got crushed during COVID. Restoration was one that thrived or was at least stable. We didn't crash. And so I think the restoration industry, I think people want to have an investment in something that's stable no matter what's going to happen in the world. But I'd also reiterate, like we were talking before this podcast started, like I don't know what the new normal is. Like things I'd say relatively are slow out there. So I think to the extent that we prove what I think the outside investors like, which is additional hurricanes, additional weather coming through, global warming. As long as that tends to stay true, I think we'll continue to see a desire to invest in restoration. I think as we see insurance tighten up, things not covered, not as many dollars being paid into the insurance world, I think you could get people less interested in that market as time evolves. I think we're too close over the last 2 years. It's been very interesting in 24 and 25. I don't know if this is the new normal or if it's not the new normal. So I think it'll be interesting to see how many people, but I can tell you, we get calls all the time. There's still a lot of interest. I would say those that have come into the market have not been as successful as they probably wish they would have been from outside. I would say some have been super successful. I would say more have failed or have not hit the returns that they were hoping for. So I think that could make people interested or less interested, depending on those that took out capital and investments. So I think it's more to come. I don't know if I could answer that over the next 5 years. 2 years ago, I would have said this is a hot market. The multiples are crazy compared to any other service industry. So I think from that perspective, like on the top end of the market, if you look at the biggest companies out there, which are driving the biggest multiples, big companies are selling for 12 to 18 times EBITDA, which is what tech companies get. The multiples are incredible. If you were to look at like a landscape business or even like environmental services, $1 billion business in environmental is hoping to get a 10x multiple. It's so small in comparison to what restoration is. You've got single operators in multiple markets getting potentially a 10x if they're size and scale. Landscapers aren't getting 15 plus multiples. So I don't know if that will continue or not over the next 5 years, but a lot to pay attention to for sure.
Okay. I don't know what direction to take that because you talked a lot about that. You talked a lot of,
Yeah.
yeah. So well, I don't want to ask you what your strategy is moving forward because I don't want you to give away your bread and butter, I suppose. But since the market has changed, what like in your day to day, I'm sure that you're kind of researching, watching the market. So how do you pivot? How do you adapt and evolve as market conditions are changing, especially when we can't quite tell, like, is this the new norm, or is it just because they're like we just haven't had a big hurricane in a little bit, but we've had wildfires and localized flooding and other things. So how do you kind of adjust your mentality of what you're looking for, what your direction is at ATI?
Well, I think any company, whether you're professionally invested or private equity backed or not, at the end of the day, there's two ways to grow. There's on the top, so top line revenue, and there's on the bottom. And so I would say for ATI right now, and I would say for the industry in a slower market, you need to grow on the bottom. So
Mhm.
how can you, one, how can you cut unnecessary costs? How can you improve profitability of the jobs that you're getting in the door? If you can't control revenue and there's only so much coming through that funnel, you've got to manage on the bottom. And I would say a good business owner is always working on both. But when you're growing on the top, you're less concerned on the bottom. And I'd say right now, everyone needs to be tightening their belts and managing their costs, their spending, things that you can cut out, you don't need to be doing. And anytime you can increase the bottom, there's years where the company has grown by 20, 30% on the top line, and we literally grew by nothing on the bottom. We had the same EBITDA, but we grew by 30% because we have so much going out the door with growth. Growing on the bottom is actually, I would tell any owner, I don't care if you're $1 million business, 10 million or 100 million or a billion, growing on the bottom is way easier and way more important than growing on the top. Everyone always wants to grow on the top. That's the cool thing to talk about. It's sexy, it's conversational, it's a happy hour discussion. It's great at conferences, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if you grow on the top. You can
No.
double your business or grow by 30, 40% and not add another job or another dollar in revenue. And that's so much more meaningful. And as someone who's acquiring businesses, I'm looking for someone that's got growth that doesn't have to be on the top. I want to see that you're making more money every year. And I want to see that curve, the staircase going up. And I don't care if it's revenue on the bottom. I'd actually prefer it to be on the bottom than on the top.
I like it. That's a good take on that. Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I just was going to say, here's a little anecdote that there's a spot where most restorers operate for gross profit margins. And if you can change your gross profit percentage by 5 points, go from 35 to 40, you will double your net profit dollars at the end of the day without growing at all. 100% you will double your net profit dollars. So if you can find your 5 points, it's going to make a big, big difference, both in the value, but in your ability to generate and churn cash out of your business.
I would say not even 5%, Phil, because five's a lot. The typical restorer makes about, again, this comes from my M&A hat, makes about 10% EBITDA, net income, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
So if I can grow 1% on the profitability line, that's a 10% increase to my bottom line if I'm not adding an overhead. And a 10% increase, that's a healthy business. I don't care what industry you're doing. And again, 1% a year. We can all find 1% margin in our jobs every year and
Yep.
not have to grow. And in 10 years, that's a lot of extra dollars without growing on the top.
Yep.
Okay, I'm going to give you a couple questions and then we can wrap up this part of it. Michelle can pick something up. Talk to me about the companies you're looking to acquire. What are the real value drivers in those companies, and what things are important to you as an acquirer of smaller companies? What do you look for? What do you value? And what should companies really be focused on developing and building in their organization?
So I think it comes down to people. I would say a good culture, but people is again for our strategy, it's the most important part. At the end of the day, we are buying people. Accounts are going to come and go, subs are going to come and go, programs will come and go. But at the end of the day, you're only as strong as your people. And the one recommendation I give to anyone is the more integral you are in the business, the more you're number two, you're number three, you're number four, you're number five. That's actually the value in the business. Anyone, I don't care what size I don't care if you're doing $1 million a year. Those people underneath you are actually what I am buying. Because if I write you a check for $1 million or multiples of millions of dollars, you can sit here and say, okay, Jeff, you just wrote me a check for $1 million. I'm going to continue to work Well, are you really? Are you going to work just as hard as you did before? Because maybe $1 million is a lot of money for them and they were paying themselves $75,000 a year. But is $75,000 a year going to keep you motivated to work the same effort you did before? I would say most of the time, you're not as motivated for the same amount of money you were making before. And as a buyer, your team is the most important part. If you get hit by a bus, and I had to do this exercise with dad, if we leave this meeting, Dad, I remember had like a
Mhm.
come to Jesus meeting with Dad, and we said, all right, we've got this business. Like, how can we afford to do and keep the business if you get hit by a truck today? And if your business is going to implode because you get hit by a truck, the business isn't worth anything. Whether you've nominated someone, whether you've got a COO, a general manager, I don't care if it's an estimator, who's going to run your business if you go on vacation for 2 weeks? If you go out of the country and you truly get disconnected, if you go to Europe for 2 weeks, can you do that, first of all? Because if you can't, your company's not worth anything because the company is you. And to the extent it's only you, it's not a sellable business. And so your team is the most important part. Again, we can lose your customer, that can all be replaced, but those people are the most important part of your business, and you need to treat them accordingly.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say my final question on it's sort of this acquisition. It's behind me on my bookshelf up here. I have a book by Sam Walton, and Sam Walton's book was all about. It was kind of his story, but it was how the independent, uh, let's say, retailer could survive when Walmart moved right next door to him. And so, same in the same vein as that, with the same nature. If if I'm just an individual, an independent, let's call myself a small scale operator. I'm doing $5 million in revenue, and I want to survive in this environment where all these acquisitions and these super companies are coming in, these big companies with great culture and all these resources are coming to my market. How do I, as the independent small company, survive in that marketplace? Just from your perspective, seeing what you've seen.
So I think it depends on the size and scale that you are. At the end of the day, there's always going to be a need for local operators. We don't all buy from Walmart. We don't buy everything from Amazon, although we try and make things as easy as possible. There's always going to be a need for local restorers. You're not going to always get the big jobs. You're going to lose jobs that you think should have been yours. You're going to lose them to people that are flying in from other states,
Hmm.
especially as they're backed by a national company. And so I would say prioritize and strategize on the local market. So you don't want to go after the person who's running or managing the mall or say a university or maybe a CBRE as an example, a big property manager. Go after the local mom and pop property manager that's managing 15 locations or 5 locations that isn't going to be on ATI or ServPro or Belfort's radar. Those companies, if they're just in your local market, they're going to want to use you. They're not going to need or want to hire an ATI or someone big and large and scaled. So there's always going to be a place for you, but don't get upset or frustrated when you lose a job or an opportunity because that one operator is now signed an account and they're managing a portfolio for a national real estate firm. You're going to lose some jobs to a larger scaled operator, and that's just the nature of the beast. So just make sure you focus your resources on people that are truly local. Don't be calling on the adjuster that's being marketed by 12 different
Mm.
people because they're working
Mhm.
in 3 different states. Call on the adjuster that's only working in your county because he doesn't care if it's ATI or ServPro or Belfor or the local mom and pop. Quite honestly, they may prefer the local mom and pop. So just know your place and make sure you're allocating your resources to that local geography and not competing with things that are outside your jurisdiction.
Yeah, I like it.
I
Sales
think that's
masterclass
great
right there.
advice.
Yes, for anybody who's
Yeah,
listening,
exactly.
masterclass right there. And a lot of restorers struggle with that, so
Yeah.
that was perfect. Okay, we can't
Yep.
talk to Jeff Moore without talking about RIA. You are the new
Yes.
incoming president, or became president at the convention this year. And the RIA continues to set records for the number of attendees at convention and for the number of members and people coming on board. So, Jeff, what are your big goals and expectations for RIA, well, during your time as president? You've done so much already, so I'm curious where you wanted to go from here.
So 2 years. So most of the presidents, it's either 1 or 2 year terms. So I'm going to do it for 2 years. 2 years isn't a long time. So I would say I've got to actually accomplish, I have one goal, and that is to communicate with members and non-members more efficiently on what we're
Mm,
doing. Um, I think that's something I can accomplish. I think we can accomplish. It's tangible, it's measurable. I think I've got big goals, just like we talked about the B word at ATI. I think for RAA, I think the big goals, if I want to paint a picture for the future way beyond my presidency, I want big insurance carriers and I want the TPAs to look at RAA as a leader in the space.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, and I understand half the people listening to this podcast hate TPAs, hate insurance companies, and half love them and get their work from it. So I don't care which side of the aisle you're from. The reality is insurance companies are involved on a lot of the jobs, not all of the jobs, but I would say a large percentage of jobs. And whether you deal with them directly or indirectly, the more we can get commonality of what is expected from us as restorers. We're not all going to agree by the same set of rules, but the more we can improve those relationships with the carriers and the TPAs and make them more friendly, not everything applies. A carrier can't grossly apply TPA rules to non-TPA contractors, but can we enhance those rules? Can we enhance expectations of what contractors should and shouldn't be doing? I think those are things long term. I would love a carrier, a top 10 carrier over the next 10 years, and I think it will take 10 years to come to RA and say, hey, I am thinking about doing X. Whatever it is, how is
mm.
RAA going to respond?
One of the things that's required, because our guest is so interesting, that's required for this to be relevant or to work is to have a substantial footprint in the contracting world. And we're still a relatively small percentage of the organization, or so not the of the industry. There's 50,000, 60, however many thousands, tens of thousands of restorers out there, and RIA is growing, but it's still a small bit. And so, is that inherent in becoming that company or that organization has a seat at the table, or is it not as important because we're the larger companies? What is your thought on that? And then also in driving membership, I think both of those things are connected.
So I think both are important. So I'd say, I define the market. Everyone's got a different version. I believe there's about 15,000 actual restoration companies. There's probably 60,000 people that will do a job or two here and there, but are not doing it on a day-to-day basis. We currently have just shy of 2,000 members. So we've got a fair population, but that's still 1 out of 7 restorers. But I'd also say the current membership represents about 30 billion of 150 billion. So we may only have 1/7, but we've got about 20% of the gross revenue of the industry. So we are growing and growing quickly, faster than we ever have. And yes, we need more members. We need more mom and pops. We need more large enterprise. We need franchisors, and everything in between. To truly be an effective trade association, we have to have more members. We want to hear everyone's perspective because they're all valid. No one's got a right perspective. ATI is not doing everything right. It doesn't work for everyone. What works for us doesn't work for independent restorers that hate TPAs and hate working for carriers. And we need to have all of those voices at the table. And that's what we're looking to do and to grow. So I think to be effective, we simply need the law of numbers, and I don't know that we have that now. We are the only trade association, at least that I know of, in restoration, and we're growing. We've got a lot of momentum, but there's a lot of people that still don't know who we are and what we're doing. And I'll give you, when I say communications, the key for me over the next 2 years. I had a meeting, and I'm not going to say who, a CEO with one of the, call it, 10 largest restoration companies. I had a 30-minute call with him. I talked to him about all the great wins we've done. And he knew about 1% of all the stuff that we've accomplished over the last 2 years.
Mm.
And this is a company of ATI size and scale that just wasn't in the know. And we are not doing a good job of communicating, or they're not getting through the channels, they're not following us on social, they're not coming to convention, whatever it is, we have to communicate better. Most carriers don't know who we are. And we got to do a better job. So when I talk about members, some people will
Mm.
compare us to I love pointing out the Rebels. So the Rebels have 10,000 members on Facebook. We have way more than 10,000 members. When I say members, I'm talking about companies. So as an example, we've got a
Mhm.
member in RA that has 50 to 70,000 employees. So we have we may have millions of RAA members that are employees, but when RAA talks about membership, we're talking about a company. ATI is one of 2,000 members, but we employ 2 to 3,000 employees that are all technically members. So we do have a big voice. The problem is most of the voice is with ownership and leadership, and it's not effectively communicated all the way down, even in my own organization, through all 2,000 plus members with an ATI. And that's where we have to communicate better. And that's one area we can do is simply communicating better to our members and all of their current employees instead of just to the leaders of those businesses.
Do you see any barriers to entry? Is it like people don't know about it? Like, what do you think the barrier is for other companies to join?
So first, I think people just don't know who we are. I think that's the first barrier to entry. Cost is out. I mean, it's $299 a year. You can pay by the month or by the year. So $299 is not a barrier of entry now. I would say, depending on the size of your business, sometimes renewal is a barrier to entry, but I would say we have a pretty high successful rate. I would say previous leadership at RA, and I'll look at like a Mark Springer and a Katie Smith. They were like the anti-TPA, anti-carrier. Then you go into Ben Looper, Jeff Moore, pro-TPA, pro-carrier. I'd say some of it is leadership and where people think we're going. And so if I'm an independent restorer that's on Restoration Rebels and I hate carriers and I hate TPA, everything Jeff talks about, I want to represent everyone, but what I believe in is I think everyone has to have diversity in their business offering. So I hear some people say, well, I don't want to do it because I hear you talking about working with carriers and communicating with carriers. So if you think that's the wrong direction, then that in itself can be a barrier of entry. But I don't think there's a lot of barriers of entry. So I think it's the communication is the biggest one. People just don't know who we are. And I other than being more active and doing more podcasts and more emails, I think the RAA has to do a better job. And I think it's our biggest weakness is marketing. And that's something that we are currently working on. It's been on our strategic roadmap and we have to communicate better. So if that's what I can win over the next 2 years, whether you sign up or not, I just want you to know what we're doing. And what we're doing is helping your business, whether you're a member or not.
Okay. Jeff, anything else RAA related that you want to talk about? I know there's the Carrier Relations Task Force, there's the AGA. What would you say is like the number one thing the AGA is working on right now? The number one thing that maybe you're excited about that's on the horizon that you can talk about?
So I'd say the biggest things we've accomplished this year legislatively, and those don't matter to, I would say, every restorer, but there are some crazy, crazy laws out there that senators and Congress are trying to pass for various reasons. And so we've had a very grassroots effort. And so again, those are things that we're helping restorers. I don't care if you're a member or not a member. Those are wins for the industry, members and non-members, and most of them are around consumer protection. And so I'll give you an example. Like there's one in California they're trying to pass right now. In California, where my business is based, you have 3 days to cancel a contract. So technically in California, if Phil were to live in California and has a flood, if I'm a homeowner, I can technically hire ATI, do a mitigation job, cancel the contract 2.5 days in, and I have no legal right to actually pay a contractor. And that's been in place for decades.
Wow.
So it has happened. We have gotten screwed over on some jobs, but it's very, very rare. They're trying to go from 3 to either, I forget if it's 5 or 7 days. So we are trying to work with legislature. And again, if this were an issue, but technically there are people out there that are looking to screw over companies and people all the time. That law, whoever's putting it in place and trying to extend it, is not done with the intentionality of an emergency service restoration contractor. And so that's just one example of dozens and dozens of bills that are out there that we get lumped into construction and service contracts, that there's a reason why they're doing that so people can get out of contracts, but it was never intentional for a contractor to get out of a job in 3 days because most work is not done in 3 days. And so I think as we expand and as we get more members, we're talking about, we're a nonprofit. We only have so many dollars. We could literally chase thousands of bills that may or may not become law, but we only have the capital to do a few of them a year. And so we're trying to choose the ones with the most membership, the most exposure, the most revenue and impact. So it tends to be the biggest states, typically in coastal areas. And I think those are the biggest wins we're doing as an association through AGA. And I would say the rest is on carrier task force relationships. And I think building and continuing to build relational things with Cotality and Verus in instituting pricing changes, policy changes on how they list the language for contractors and carriers, and getting them to make those changes. And we've made huge pricing increases in both of them over the last 3 years. I think labor alone, I think I looked at before conventional with Cotality. I want to say it was like we looked at like two markets. I think it was like LA and Dallas and maybe Miami. And I want to say in 3 years through RA's involvement, I want to say labor only had increased by like 45% over 3 years. Huge
Wow.
wins.
Yeah.
Again, it's not to say that Cotality may not have had done some of that on their own, but I don't think they would have had 40 and 45% labor increases without our involvement with our pricing strategy in the AGA. So a lot of things we're doing behind the scenes, some of which we can tell the membership about, some of which we're under NDA and can't even tell about. Like some of our biggest wins, like one of our biggest wins this year, I can't even tell you about because we're under tight-lipped disclosure, but I can tell you it's a huge win for anyone who's on the construction side of things. But we're pardon my French, we're doing shit. It's making an impact for restorers, and some things we can tell you about, some things we can't. And sometimes it's the things that we can't that actually makes the biggest impact in your business.
Yeah. Love it. Bill, you ready for the any more
So
RA
I
questions
just
or the closeout
no,
question?
I just heard Jeff say that he's going to fix California. This is crazy.
No,
Good
no
job,
way.
RIA.
There's no one can fix California, Phil.
That's
I
a
left that. I left that 20 years ago. There's no fixing that state.
Okay.
Well,
All
okay,
right.
so we like to
Go.
end,
You're
okay,
on.
we like to end all of the podcasts by asking people to share a funny story. It can be a job that you were on maybe when you were younger, or an interesting story with your team, or something from a convention, just kind of anything, any super memorable, slightly entertaining, hopefully, story from your time in the industry.
The funniest job story
Uh,
was did a job for a hotel brand. Um, this brand got hacked and they had like 12 jobs currently. We were one of like three restorers they used. And there was an old disgruntled employee, national hotel chain. I'm sure we've all stayed there. And a disgruntled employee hacked their telephone system and ended up making all these
oh,
prank calls to these hotels. And they had it pseudo, it looked like they were calling from corporate, but they weren't. And so they hacked the phone lines and then they got a hold of the operator, then they got a hold of guests. And so ATI ended up doing like 3 or 4 $250,000 jobs. They got a hold of people in these rooms and they told them, I'm calling from XYZ brand. We've got an outbreak of some sort, and I need you to take the television on the third story in room 323, and I need you to literally throw the television out the window. I want you to turn on the water in your bathtub and flood the bathroom. And I want you to take your mattress and your bed frame and throw it out the window. And obviously, not everyone did it, but there was plenty of people that did this. And I want you to break the fire sprinkler system above you. And there was multiple people that
wow.
did it. And literally over a 30-day period, this one disgruntled employee probably
Oh,
created
jeez.
upwards of like $10 million worth of claims. ATI did a third of it. But that was like the
Wow.
craziest thing that they hijacked the phones, total disgruntled employee, like, and
Wow.
the
Wow.
fact that these people did exactly what they said, it still baffles me that someone
Yes.
can call you on your phone in your room and someone's actually going to do something crazy and stupid like they did. But it was like the weird, and some of these like it was one person in one hotel, but they did the sprinkler, so they're doing it from above. They're turning on the tub. Most of them are on the third floor, and some of them flooded like 74 rooms to tune
Wow.
to where they were doing millions of dollars of damage because of one person was disgruntled and got a hold of one person that was an idiot that
Oh
actually did
my
what they were told to do.
goodness.
And it was like the craziest. funniest, oddest thing. And I remember like we had to fly into corporate for this company. They finally figured out it was one person. Obviously, they went after them and prosecuted them, but they did so much damage in so many hotels. It was just
Wow.
crazy loss scenario that we'd never dealt with before.
I feel like I've heard that story
Yeah,
from another restorer before. I feel like that's interesting. And don't mess with disgruntled employees, I guess. And I also want to know how many people would
exactly.
actually, like the three of us on this call, would you have done that if somebody called your room? I can't imagine that
No.
I possibly wouldn't.
Yeah. We might have done that in my dorm room, but I'm not saying anything.
It,
Yeah, it's like the guy you listen to on like Kiss FM that's doing like the roses game. Like,
yes.
okay, I'm calling you
Yeah.
with free roses. Jeff, you're married. So which women do you want to send these roses to? And you give someone else. Like there are stupid people out there. Like it just requires you to be a stupid person. But like seriously, like I mean, but there are dumb people out there that just follow the rules and do what they were said. And clearly there was enough people out there that did it. But yeah, baffling.
Baffling. Well, those are
Yes.
fabulous stories. Jeff, thank you
Great
so much for
stories.
joining us. This was really fun. Any closing well, Jeff, any closing comments? And then Phil, then you can wrap it up.
No, the last thing I'd end with the one thing I was taught early on in my career. I don't care what you do in the business, like everything comes down to sales. And I remember the first thing I did when I was an estimator working for my dad was I was told, Jeff, you need to build your own book of business. I'm going to give you this program because I don't understand it. It was back before Contractor Connection. I'm going to give you all this BS work that we don't like and no one in the office wants to do. And the rest of it, you need to go find people and you need to have tenacity. You need to be willing to pick up the phone. There's lots of customers. There's a lot of people that need our services. The companies that thrive are the ones that are willing to make cold calls, call people, email, set up meetings. Like we are a service that people need, but people need to know who the heck you are. There's a lot of people that do what we do. And the difference between someone who's going to thrive and grow is an owner that's willing to pick up the phone. So if you just left ATI and you started your business yesterday, or you're at $1 million business, like the difference in a good business that I want to buy is someone who's got tenacity, who's got no fear, is willing to make the phone call because at the end of the day, that's what grows the business. Getting down and dirty. And if you've got to do it as a leader, you can't expect anyone to do for you what you're not willing to do for yourself.
Amen. Hmm.
Wow. Great points, Jeff. I appreciate that. It's nice that you could join us. I've gotten to know your brothers and your father. You have a remarkable family, and just the great conversation and the sharing you had and what you're giving back to the industry is representation of your entire family and the commitment they've made to the industry and the culture that they've helped build. And so we appreciate you being here. And gosh, we wish you continued success and look forward to the next opportunity where we actually get to sit down with a cocktail in between us on the next happy hour around a bar. So,
Sounds
Jeff,
sounds much
great to
better.
have you.
It does.
Yes,
Thank
it
you very
does.
much.
Thanks,
It was a
Jeff.
blast.
Yeah, appreciate it.